All right, everyone. Today we'll be doing our Horror Brodown, where we will take the three games we previously discussed and have that courtroom style debate and see which game comes out on top. Just as a reminder, those three games are Until Dawn, The Evil Within 2, and SOMA. All right, for those that don't know, in this Brodown episode, me, Anthony, and my brothers Pete and Tom will have that courtroom style debate where each of us is defending the game that we chose for this genre while attacking the other two games. Based on the arguments made throughout the episode, we will rank the games individually to come up with a consensus and declare a winner. Just as a reminder, to hear our unbiased analysis and opinions for each of these three games, go back and listen to the respective episodes for these games. All right, just to set up the episode, let's just say who we are defending. I will be defending Until Dawn. Tom will be defending The Evil Within 2, and Pete will be defending SOMA. So let's get this started. And which one of these three horror games will be the Halloween champion this year?
Well, I think clearly the answer to that question is going to be The Evil Within 2. So I think that out of all the games we've discussed in this category, Evil Within 2 by far has the best value of any of the games. And by that, I mean...
starting with value.
By that, I mean that both Until Dawn and SOMA are very story-based games that are basically you're going to play them once, maybe enjoy it, and then you don't really have a need to play these games anymore. And both are relatively short in those one playthroughs as well.
Yeah, I don't really think that. I mean, Until Dawn, I think the ultimate story game here. Its main focus is the story. You can play it multiple times. We've all made that point previously to try to get the different outcomes. I think it has a great value based on that. Not only value, but replay value.
Yeah,
important category here.
I don't know that I would really agree with that because the replay value in that game is really just... it becomes more like a chore just to see the ending or the different outcomes rather than something that you would naturally do. Like you're intentionally fudging the game.
But is the game fun?
It is in its first playthrough, but then the replay value part is not fun because you already know what's coming in the story. And
but what's the replay value in Evil Within 2?
I'm glad you asked.
Are you going to answer, or are you just going to be glad he asked?
I'm glad you asked because there's a ton. First of all, there's a new difficulty that unlocks after you beat the game once, which is a real challenge. So for people who are actually good at games and like to get a challenge.
SOMA also has two difficulties. Proceed.
Do they unlock after beating the game once?
What does it matter if it unlocks or not? You have to play it twice to be able to play all the difficulties. So no, but it doesn't matter.
But the two difficulties are one, you can't die, and the other one is the normal one in SOMA.
That's true.
Anyway, so you're referring in the Evil Within 2, you're referring to classic mode, which I am still trying to get through.
Right. Yes. Real
so
challenge.
What else?
Well, so there's a lot of optional side quests and optional missions in Evil Within 2 that you might not necessarily get to in your first playthrough. Also additional weapons that you can use after your first playthrough, and some that you may not even get in your first playthrough, like the flamethrower, for example. And then on top of that, there's the, optional resonances. And just because the game has such a robust progression system as well, you can opt to go into a different route in a subsequent playthrough. So, for example, first playthrough you might focus on stealth, and then the second playthrough you might want to focus on weapons proficiency and stuff like that.
Yeah, but like games like The Evil Within, games like Until Dawn, there's a lot of collectibles in there, but collectibles that enrich the story, whether that's getting more background on the characters or the prior history of this, the mountain and the mines, and uh, different totems and things like that. All that enrich the story. So you can run through, and like mentioned how in his playthrough he had wished he had spent more time discovering stuff. And so like he can go back now and try to discover that. And not only that, when you have a system where there's these 8 characters and all can die in your playthrough, or all can survive, and many combinations in between, that just really lends itself to having extra value. Just as an aside, not so much in the game itself, but we did a lot of like research because of the game, like trying to figure out, well, like, what happens within this tree branch and what happens with this tree branch. If this character says this, does that change an outcome? And I think, you have the as far as value is concerned, you have the replay value. You can try to figure that all out yourself, but just sort of this, there's something to be said, I think, for the going down these games that allow you to kind of go down a rabbit hole a little bit, as long as it doesn't become too obsessive, but trying to, go online and reading blogs or posts or whatever about a game, or watching videos can be very interesting. Listening to podcasts like ours.
I would just say those are good points, but as somebody who has gotten the Platinum Trophy in Until Dawn, I can tell you from experience that a lot of what you're doing when you're replaying it is quite boring and repetitive, and a lot of the story ends up being exactly the same, regardless of who you're trying to purposely kill or whatnot.
It's true. So SOMA does pretty much none of those things, but one of the last things that Ant mentioned I want to harp on a little bit, and that was about making the player want to kind of investigate and read about it online or whatever. And SOMA is a game that certainly does that. So this topic evolved a little bit into replay value, and I think SOMA doesn't have a lot of that, but it really makes the player want to see what other people.
I'm just laughing because you said see
what other people. I was going to say think about the game, but that's not really what I'm trying to articulate. It's kind of like all the themes and kind of philosophy and messaging associated with the game, and the ethics and the ethical decisions you are faced with in the game.
Well, tell us about it in case someone hasn't listened to our SOMA episode yet.
Well, there's a few instances where, without trying to get into too much details, though, where a person...
light spoilers warning.
Oh, good. Thanks for that. Where certain characters are kind of left in a state of, not high-functioning being, and their consciousness was transferred to a different body or a robot body, and you're faced with the decision of whether you could sort of, quote unquote, pull the plug on them or kind of leave them to survive in this undesirable and unenjoyable state. So decisions like that, which is there's some ethics involved and other things as well. But anyway, so my point is that SOMA certainly makes you want to go on the message boards and the chat rooms and see what others think.
What year is this?
And so another thing I want to bring up is because, Tom, you started with value, and then it kind of again evolved into replay value. But again, you're not necessarily replaying SOMA because it's so story rich, and once you got that story, you kind of don't need it again. But
yeah, that was my point.
Yeah, but it really stays with you for a long time, and because it relates well to real world concepts. So when I'm brushing my teeth at night, sometimes I'm thinking like, oh, remember in SOMA when this happened? That was like real life.
Yeah, but you really kind of jettison the whole replay or value talk into like a story.
No, but I'm saying it is
Or
value
effect. Yeah.
because you might not be playing it 3 or 4 times, but you're thinking about it for a lifetime.
Yeah.
That's a little dramatic, I think.
Well, that's hyperbolic, but the point is that it's more than a game. You know, it really does stick with you, and it makes you think. Whereas Evil Within 2 doesn't make you think one lick. I mean, there's some strategy in the game, but as soon as you power off, that's that's gone.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point about Evil Within 2 because I felt like the Evil Within 1 did make you kind of think, and it's Mobius, putting together the system and like trying to bind all of these minds and the consequences of that. And just very mysterious. And, you had everything with Ethan, not Ethan, wrong horror game. Leslie. What's his last name? It wasn't Winters, was it?
I think it was Withers or something
Withers,
like that.
yeah. Leslie, that's where I'm getting confused. Anyway. But there were just these cool characters and cool story, and then I feel like there was a big drop off in Evil Within 2, and maybe that's I'm comparing it against that and not necessarily these other games, but that became more like a open world actiony type of game, and I don't think it was that scary. That's the big difference too. And we're talking about a horror genre, and I'm bringing up another category right now, but it's
we're ready. I'm ready to move on to the next category.
But let's talk about that scare factor.
So, if you're opening the floor, I'll go ahead. This is an overarching point I want to make, and that's the relatability of these games. And I bring that up here because if things are not relatable, they're not that scary, Whereas if you could envision yourself in a situation that the characters in the game are in, it adds to the fear factor. So, Until Dawn, and I actually wanted to make this argument during the episode, but it was like 8 hours long, so I didn't. But I didn't get a chance to. But I honestly, especially at the beginning in particular in the beginning of the game, I really had this cringe feeling. It was like these high school kids going their parents are out of town and these high school kids are meeting up and gonna hook up or something. It was very I was I really am not comfortable playing this game. This is something that's geared towards the high school kid. So that's number one. So it was so unrelatable in that sense, but also just the main antagonist of the game, right? These Wendigos that overtake
formed by cannibalism.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, thank you. I never thought about anything remotely like that once in my entire life before playing that game. So it's just so far fetched and out there. I could not relate to even the kids one bit. So it just takes away from the idea of being scary to me. And I think to a lot of our listeners. And then for Evil Within,
Evil Within
I feel I don't even have to. Evil Within 2, excuse me. I feel I don't even have to argue against that. You're in some imagination world where the monsters are based on someone's imagination and the world is breaking up and you're transferring from one place to another. Again, just totally out there. And it's whatever. Interesting form of art and imagination. But again, if it's so unrelatable, it's just hard to be scary. And so that takes us to Soma. And again, a lot of what it's about is the extent of preserving life and how AI is impacting our lives and what it means to be human and how AI and machines are challenging and changing what it means to be human. All things that we can relate to. And it's kind of scary in the real world to think of what AI might mean to our lives in the near and the distant future. So Soma by far was the scariest and creepiest.
Thank you, ChatGPT.
I don't.
Would you like me to reword that?
But go ahead.
I reject the premise because if you say that Soma is about AI and the other thing you said, preserving human life,
and what it
Then-
means to be human.
Yeah, then you could say that Evil Within 2 is about, you know, getting over your past grievances and, saving or, having the courage to, save your loved ones and confront your past fears, and those are
But that's not
relatable
what-
topics.
But that's not what
Yeah.
the game is.
I don't know, Pete, though, because I would say if something had to be relatable to be scary, then like I don't know, 75% of horror movies wouldn't be scary. I don't know. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like a lot of stuff is like, look,
Friday
people
the-
believe different things, but like a lot of the paranormal stuff, a lot of people believe that's not real. So like then that's not scary, but those are really
No,
scary
I think
movies.
that's scary.
Like,
That's scary to the people that believe that's real.
yeah, but I don't know that everyone seeing that movie and thinking it's scary is a believer of paranormal activity. Stuff with like The Exorcist and the devil and stuff like that. Not everyone believes that stuff, but I still feel they would find the movie scary.
Well, okay. I mean, we're going
Well,
We're going
that's
a
your
little-
point, and I'm just
No,
pointing out that it's not really a good point.
Okay, fine. But I was going to
Because
say
I thought
feel like a lot of people-
Until Dawn was the scariest here. I mean, I don't know if it's a factor of the graphics, which we'll get into a little bit, but are far superior to Soma, and I would say at least slightly better than Evil Within 2. But that could be a factor. But I honestly think, even if you don't think the Wendigo part was that scary, even though I think monsters are scary to most people, even if they're not believed, but just all the stuff with the quote unquote psycho before you find out it's Josh. I mean, I think it was very scary. It's like someone in this lodge with you that is doing all of the scary stuff and attacking you and all of that. So, I mean, that's
true. I'll grant you that.
That's probably the
that's
realest
relatable.
of all. That's
Yeah.
probably the most relatable of anything that happened in any of these games. So.
No, Soma's without question the most.
I don't know. I think
relatable.
a psycho chasing you is
Quote,
always going to be
unquote,
scary.
Psycho.
What?
Quote unquote psycho.
Quote unquote psycho.
Yeah, that's very relatable. Yeah,
But
I granted.
I
you
don't
that
know
already.
if that level of AI stuff that's in Soma is relatable at this moment. I mean, we'll probably get to that point. I agree with you there, and I agree with the game there on its commentary, I guess, on that. But I don't know that we're there yet.
I just want to go back to the point you made about people who don't believe in paranormal stuff and ghosts find it scary, but they, in their rightest mind, don't believe that stuff. But they're also like the people who like, oh, I know there's nobody like behind the shower curtain, but they still pull the shower curtain just to check. Like, so there's something there.
Yeah.
But if the individual can't relate to what it's going on and thinks it's basically impossible, then I'm not saying it can't be scary, but it's less likely to be as scary as something that is relatable and that you could see yourself in that similar situation.
Yeah, but in Soma, you're like in a robot body and walking through the bottom of the ocean.
Then blasted into space. Your consciousness.
Yeah. Like I don't know.
That's the superficial aspect of it. The truer aspect is, data transfer into a robot body and, preserving human life in that manner and things like that. That could absolutely be true in the future.
Oh, looks like we're not going to agree here.
I don't know. I just feel like a game that really makes you think could be scary. Games that don't make you think can't be scary or can't be as scary.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, look, all of these games, we all kind of came to a consensus that I think they're properly within a horror category. So I mean, there's going to be an element of scariness in each of them, but which one is more so than the other, or which one's more so than the other? I think that's important. We always discuss that. It's important for this category, and I'm sticking to my guns. I really think Until Dawn is the scariest here. I mean, I could say Soma's maybe second. I was really disappointed in Evil Within 2, just because the Evil Within 1, to me, was very scary. And just unsettling and, like, crouching and walking. Like,
Anthony's strategy is to compare Evil Within 2 to Evil Within 1 for every category to diminish. the sequel.
The judge hasn't struck me down yet.
I mean, I agree with you. Evil Within 1 was much better in pretty much every aspect.
But I agree. We'll try to keep the Evil Within 1 talk to a minimum. If everyone's content with their arguments on the scariness of these games, we should move on to another category. Why don't we kind of touched on it. Should we go talk a little bit more in depth about the story and make our arguments there?
You should.
I'm shaking his head no. Just let the record reflect.
Do you want to start?
Me?
Yeah, you brought it up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. I think the Until Dawn story, I like the game itself and the choices with the branching and stuff. I like how the story kind of branched out from where you thought it was going to start, where, like you said, it almost was like a teen horror slasher flick to, to more of a discussion about evil curses and bringing in these elements of cover up by the mine owners or whatever about these individuals that went missing, and an explanation for why these Wendigos exist as opposed to them just being these monsters. And it might be a little far-fetched, and it did go into a lot of the horror tropes with, Tom mentioned in the episode, it has one of the most quintessential ones of, Native American burial ground, built, this thing is built on a Native American burial ground, and it's causing all of these curses to occur. But I still thought that was good. It brought in, like, some of that culture, in both collectibles and just the story. And, I think it was cool because you did kind of have all of these, I don't want to say bratty, but, just like the way high school kids or early college kids, I really don't know exactly how old they were supposed to be, I forget, but like, just sort of acting superficially and caring more about, their little relationships and other maybe petty grievances that they may have. And then, they come into their own and they have to survive, and it's very daunting and all of that. So I don't know. I thought it fit well. And I thought the story was good, and it was cool learning about like the Wendigos.
Yeah, I disagree with most of that. That last part is a good point, though. I like any time where you could sort of learn something from outside the game, and those Wendigos is a concept that people believe or used to believe. So that was cool to read a little bit about and learn. But I mean, the Soma story is, I think, on two other levels above at least these other games here. The character that you're playing as, Simon, he's in an accident, he's having some like head problems, headaches and whatever, and so they're trying to figure out what's wrong with him to cure him. So they take scans of his brain, and he agrees that they can use the data for future research to hopefully help other people. And then you kind of wake up from that scan in just this dark, foreign place. And so, the first part of the game is just discovery of where you are and why you're there. And then, ultimately you learn that you're that character, Simon, but many, many years in the future after he has already died. And and you start meeting other people, and you learn the objective of trying to save humanity, and I'll say questionable ways that they're trying to do that. Questionable in terms of ethics or not. And again, I brought it up before, but then raises questions about really what does it mean to be human, and is human life worth preserving? To what extent is it worth preserving, and all that. So like, that's a very robust and interesting story. And again, it's, you could take it outside of the game and really think about things in the real world. So I really thought that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, just a question: was that the story or more of the themes and arguments presented? Like, was the story itself good, or do you feel it's the same? I don't.
Well, the themes are the most important part of a story. What, if somebody picks up a red spoon, that's not so important. But what the red spoon symbolizes, that's the important part of a story. So yes, it is the story.
Yeah. I wish it was a little bit easier to understand as you went through with Soma. Just like, as far as like there were a lot of characters you never even saw a picture of. It was hard to like keep them all in order, I feel, and like characters are part of the story. So I just feel like it was a little hard to get through to get to that.
No, I totally disagree. And even at work, maybe there's some legacy that someone had before you got to your company that you hear about, and you don't, you know, you have bits and pieces about their contribution, their personality, but you don't necessarily know a lot about them, what they look like. That was just like Soma's, slice of life.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. Soma was a little bit hard to understand for a while. Like you just kind of like didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah, but that's the point. The first part of the game, you were not supposed to know what was going on, and it was all very confusing. And that was exactly what you
Yeah,
were supposed to
yeah,
feel.
I just think the pacing of the story was a little bit
yeah, I think
slow. Like
it,
it took them too long to cut to the chase.
it was a
It
little
built
too.
anticipation.
It was too. It was fish out of water for a little too long, I feel.
No, I totally disagree because even very early on, you find that robot. I think his name was Carl, and he's like basically insisting that he's not that he is a human.
Yeah,
And then you find out you see his human body, you know, dead a little later on. And that was very early on in the game. So you're starting to get clues right away. If you weren't intelligent enough to kind of put some pieces together, that's on you.
Attacking the person, an ad hominem attack there.
nice use of rhetorical strategies.
I just don't understand what was confusing about the Soma story.
I don't think eventually you get to it. I just think like
Okay.
getting through it was a little bit of a slog, even with the story itself, not just the game.
Okay. Fair enough. I
What do you
disagree.
have?
But anyway, so Evil Within 2 story, it takes on themes that, I touched on it earlier that are relatable to people like, redemption and, you know, character growth. So, you start off with Sebastian in, a bad way, bad mental state. And then, as you play through the game, he's struggling with, coming to grips with the events of the past game, which we all loved. And, many of those references from the old game are brought into the sequel. Yeah, and then, it all kind of culminates in that fight against Theodore. Yeah, where you're kind of like confronting your past demons and overcoming that kind of guilt. And you get glimpses into like what's really impacting Sebastian in I think many of them are optional, like side missions or whatever, where there's that monster that, breathes ice into you and kills you instantly.
Yeah, but
Yeah, so yeah.
we're talking more about themes, like again, like what about the story that they
Yeah, I mean the
use?
story
Like
was
you
good. I
had
mean
O'Neill and you
it
had
starts off a little straightforward, which I don't know. I mean, you could either say it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I think after the first Evil Within, where it was, confusing up until really the last scene, I think a lot of people kind of welcomed that this game had a fresh take on the story.
Mhm.
Because that was really a complaint of a lot of people in the original that it was
including
fun,
us.
fun game that it was just too hard to understand what was going on.
Yeah,
And yeah, we all agreed with that too. So this game was a little bit more straightforward, but then there was that, they threw twists in. At first you think that Stefano was the like main antagonist, but then eventually you end up learning that, he's not the main antagonist, someone else is, and there's this whole plot to take down Mobius from the inside.
yeah,
And
that part was cool.
Sebastian's like, long lost wife is involved in the plot too. So it really, develops a kind of like engaging and like interesting story
Yeah,
to keep you going throughout the game.
it's a story, but it's nothing like it's not going to win an award. Like Soma might, whether you liked it or didn't like it, I don't know. But at least Soma is the type of story that could win an award. The Evil Within 2 stories just sort of try to move along the gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Evil Within 2, I mean, what you said at the end there, I got to kind of concede. I mean, the stuff with Myra and the takedown of Mobius from the inside was like that was the good part of the story. I just feel like Fano and Theodore were just like it was just like, oh, we need an enemy, so here they are. And we could talk more about the characters in these games. So we'll do that in the next category maybe. But as far as driving the story, like, why was Stefano there? I don't know. Like, I just don't get like why they made his character that way, but like a psychotic photographer.
Well, it was because he was a former war photographer. So he saw people being killed all the time. And that kind of drove him in that direction to like respect
Death.
or
The
appreciate.
gore, yeah.
Yeah, like the whatever artistic qualities of death and whatnot.
I will say that I missed that in the story actually.
Well, I think you should have been paying closer attention then.
All I remember from Stefano was that weird paper, that clip from the newspaper that said this girl went missing, and for some reason they interviewed her photographer, this guy Stefano, and how his comment was about how like there was such beauty in her death, and it's like, okay, well, that's the bad guy.
Yeah. You made that joke on the episode.
Make it again. All right, so piggybacking on the story, let's talk about the characters in this game, both pro and antagonists.
Well, in terms of protagonists, I mean, I think Sebastian is definitely the coolest out of the group. I mean, Simon, we kind of agreed it was like a whiny little baby for pretty much the whole game.
I don't know if we agreed on that. I mean, I felt for Simon, and I don't want to keep bringing this up, but he was a relatable character. He was an everyman.
Did it get you thinking?
He was a Canadian everyman.
But
like Sebastian again, he's just it sounds like a mediocre story writer wrote up Sebastian. That's what he was.
Not mediocre. He was a relatable character. I mean, everyone goes through hardships and, has to try to find a way to overcome them. Or, and if you can't, then you end up succumbing to the evil within.
I mean, and look, the characters as far as protagonists, I mean, I think having those kids, and I think the writing in Until Dawn was really good with the characters because you kind of went from seeing them as bratty and immature to, and I just made this point, but I mean, I think it goes to the character writing and brave and mature. You really do feel for them. I mean, these are things, the things they went through are not things you would wish on your worst enemy, kind of a thing. And these are just kids. While they may be,
well, that's true of every one of these games.
Yeah,
and a lot of games.
But
I think
they were less equipped than anyone to deal with that stuff, and they had to go through it. So there is sort of like a relatability there, and I think it was interesting because they were a group of friends, but they weren't all exactly alike. Like you had like characters like Sam that was more like compassionate, I think, and a little less childlike, and then you had.
It was a very improbable group of friends. Like that wouldn't really exist in a real life situation, probably. Like I don't think like Hannah would have been friends with Matt or.
I agree.
Like Jessica, or very Emily.
Very, very unrelatable. How that dynamic.
It was really just like everyone from the school. Like all the they represented each exactly. Kind of like clique that would be in a high school.
Yeah, so they picked the most exaggerated form of an individual and put them in. Like to me, that was the most amateurish writing of the three games, in terms of writing of characters. And we talked about that.
I have to say, as villains, though, I do think having the combo of Josh as the quote-unquote psycho, having other extraneous characters like the flamethrower guy, I don't know. I thought those characters were interesting, added an element of depth that, it just wasn't these kids, but, did have these other characters involved. And then, of course, the Wendigos as the main antagonist.
What about them? They were there.
They were interesting.
Yeah, that's true.
They were fearsome foes.
Yeah, you could just stop moving on a dime, and then they would suddenly not stop attacking you.
Well, they also had the power to make you to make your control quote unquote move even when it wasn't moving. So that was the thing. But this is where Tom says soul.
I want to get back to
no. But,
okay, go ahead.
I have to say, the Evil Within 2 villains, most of them were either very boring, like Stefano and Theodore, like as far as main villains are concerned, or just an amalgamation of body parts. Like the ones in Evil Within 1 were so like defined and cool and represented different sort of like mental, problems. Whereas I feel like they really just said like, let's throw things together and those will be the enemies here, or make them really boring humans like Theodore. But
Stefano was cool though, like the way he killed people and captured them in time, captured the death, and like had a little plaque with their name on it to make it look like an art installation in a museum or something. Like that was a cool concept and a cool idea.
Yeah, that was actually somewhat creative. I'll give you that.
So I think he was a pretty good antagonist. I mean, honestly, they could have even did more like that. That may have been the fault in the games that they didn't expand on his character even more.
well, that's the thing. He kind of was like, if you didn't read that newspaper clipping, that was silly in and of itself. Like you really had no reason to know why he was there. Like at least with Theodore, like there was a reason he was there. Like, and they give that information, and you kind of, you run into that information regardless. But I don't know. Did Theodore like employ Stefano? I guess that was sort of
Right.
the thing. But like, why?
Yeah,
Like you could have had any random psychotic person, and I don't know.
I feel like there's a few holes in the Evil Within 2 story like that, or not necessarily even holes, but just like shortcomings of explanations.
Shoehorned.
But so Evil Within 2 and Until Dawn are games for children, so that's why they tell you this is the bad guy, this is the good guy. But Soma is a game for men and women, adults, let's say. And like you look at
the
what
Maui in the Moana movie. It's like hero to all man, women. I don't like. I forget what he said. It was something like
something like what I
you
just said. But take a look at the WoW, for example, and it's really a question of whether is that a good guy, quote unquote, or a bad guy, a face or a heel.
That's WoW, WAU.
Yeah,
the uninitiated listeners there.
Yeah, so that was kind of the AI component of the story that was preserving the human life at all costs, but it was also sort of deforming, preserving their life to the extent of that, people were suffering and just hanging on in an undesirable state. But they also sort of deforming humans into some of the monster creatures that you see in the game. And so you're actually faced with the decision to destroy the WoW because maybe it's doing wrong, or to not destroy it because it's doing good, preserving human life. So, that complexity is incredibly interesting and is really a character that's, complex, unlike in the two games you're defending.
I do think having Hannah, who was, originally thought to have died, and then had to cannibalize her sister, become sort of the main Wendigo in the story in Until Dawn, was, a clever way to add another element to the dynamic. I just said a bunch of like cliche words there, but
was it clever?
I think it was because you could have really just had them being monsters, and like they got stuck on this mountain. They think it's one thing, and it's a big misdirection because it's really these other monsters that are after them and hurting them.
So I think that. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, just on that. I mean, we even made the point in our Until Dawn episode where it was kind of like we all see where this is going, so it wasn't that clever in terms of.
Well, that's just because they kept force feeding the butterfly tattoo. That was the comment we were making, not so much that. Oh, and then with the diary, okay, fine, but
well, they had to reveal it at some point.
Yeah, that was just more of the reveal. Maybe they ham-handedly did that, but not the fact of that being a thing to reveal wasn't the problem, in my mind. In my view.
I just take a second. What you did a minute or two ago, saying all those big words, was like that Weird Al song "Mission Statement." Check it out if you don't know.
Is that off a newer album?
Yeah, one of the later
I'm
ones,
not as familiar with that.
But just using all corporate words.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that though.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think that Myra was actually a very complex character in The Evil Within 2, and ended up being kind of like one of the main antagonists. But like she's kind of like conflicted in this, in the story where she wants to protect Lily at all costs, but then she also has this other goal of taking down Mobius, which is related to protecting Lily, I guess. But, and then she has to kind of make this decision to sacrifice herself in order to fully take down Mobius and get Lily out. And, so this ends up kind of like causing conflict between her and Sebastian. And, they don't get to have their happy ending with reuniting the whole family. Yeah, so there's, a lot of complexity to that character, too. That, you can like poo-poo Stefano and Theodore. But at the end of the day, the main antagonist really is Myra, and she's kind of like antagonist, but also a balanced character in that she's not just like pure evil
within.
Like yeah,
Like what?
Like the Wendigos or something like that.
Well, the Wendigos are not pure evil though, because remember, one way to save Josh is to get through to the Hannah Wendigo, and that is a branch that can happen.
Yeah, but I mean, not really saving him. You're preventing him from dying, but then he ends up becoming a monster that's going to kill a bunch of people. So,
all right, let's
hold on.
Go ahead.
This is not an important point to make, but I want to make it because you said something that I don't think is true, or at least I disagree with. And you said that out of all the game or all the characters in the games, that the kids in Until Dawn were a little least equipped to deal with what they have to deal with. And I don't know, are 16-year-olds less equipped than, one 30-something-year-old Simon to deal, I don't know. And apparently some of the kids knew how to shoot a gun at least. And Simon was just like, what was he, a comic book store manager or something? Who didn't have, so not necessarily important point to make, but I wanted to get the facts right.
All right, fair enough. So I think we haven't touched on like the actual core gameplay of these games in this.
Whoa! Part. We can't move on to characters. What I want to emphasize is the kind of support characters. Until Dawn, there's kind of like one, basically the flamethrower guy who's kind of cool. Evil Within 2, there's few of those. I guess
there's several. You got O'Neill,
the Mobius.
Well, O'Neill's a little separate because he turns villainous. He's more than a support character. But
you got Hoffman, you got Torres.
Yeah, you have a few of them. They didn't really have a lot of personality. They were not to me. They weren't likable at all. They don't really do much for you.
They were no Joe Oda.
People only liked him because of his axe.
and they're no Joe Oda, and they're also no Sarah Lindwall. Remember her? She was the last human that you meet in Soma. Like that was really cool.
Actually, did not remember her name.
Yeah, that's a cool scene, but that's not really a cool character. That character could have been swapped with any human in the entire universe. That's not a cool character.
It's not
it's
cool.
A cool idea.
It's not cool that she's the last human.
Again, that's the concept, not the character.
The idea was cool, not the character.
And then the other character that's with you in robot form the entire time is quite
That's
annoying.
Totally wrong. People will go to a museum to see, the first American flag ever made because it's cool because it's the first one, or if it's the last one, that thing is cool. It's not a concept. So what you guys are saying is totally wrong. The character was cool because she was the last human on Earth. But also I mentioned Carl, the
dead body.
Yeah, but that was really cool, and that was really your first. I really love that scene or those couple of scenes, because that was really your first clue into discovery of what's going on. And he was robot talking in either total denial or whatever you want to call it, that he wasn't human. And then you find out, what's going on here? He once was a human, but now he's a robot, and he doesn't know he's a robot.
Yeah, but that doesn't even make any sense, because why would he not know he's a robot? Meanwhile, Simon knows that he's
in another form.
Yeah.
Did he know that at first?
Well, I don't know, but he's able to look around and see things. So couldn't he look at himself and see that he's not him?
I mean, that's the thing. Maybe that Carl consciousness in the robot couldn't see, and therefore couldn't see he was in the robot. But I think we're really going down a
Yeah.
weird rabbit hole here. Like, if you're gonna mention characters in Soma that are cool, I would, again, that was a cool scene. It didn't have to be Carl.
I
And
liked Carl and I liked Sarah Lindwall.
but who is
They're memorable.
what was the name of your helper?
Kath.
Catherine.
Oh, Kath. Yeah,
Kath.
right. We commented on that.
And she was
She
cool
was not a
too.
good character.
No, she was cool in the sense
Again,
that
a cool concept, but she herself was very condescending and
these are all
like-
concepts. They're all fictional characters. That's what they are. They're concepts. They're ideas. And, she was an original architect of the program that is going on in the game to preserve humanity, to save humanity. So that was kind of cool. It's cooler than Sykes or whatever his name was in Evil Within 2.
Why? Actually, his storyline was really cool because he's trying to figure a way to get out of the
so
the
cool.
stem. Well,
Yeah,
it
so
is
was
cool
everyone.
because he took this chance. Like, I think there was like a 25% chance that he would survive the way that he decided to leave STEM, like using the back door, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. It's all kind of
So that's,
a little. Okay.
so that was cool. That was
It
cool.
was cool, a little amateurish. 25% chance for some reason. The back door, to use a general vague term that people will know what you mean, but you don't have to explain actually how it works. Like, it's all kind of half ideas that kind of just work to progress the story in the game. But whatever, it was cool enough.
Yeah, that was a side quest anyway, so it's not like they had to do that.
True.
All right.
Okay, now I'm done
can
with
we move on to
characters.
gameplay?
Yeah,
All right. Let's talk about the gameplay here.
but only if you think the gameplay in Until Dawn was the best.
But
Well,
no
I
one
will
here,
make-
I don't think actually thinks that, right?
Oh.
I would highly doubt it.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to look at it within the type of game it is, and like for that type of game, I think it was a good gameplay, and it presents a unique component as far as choosing things and having those choices actually matter in a lot of instances. And then they did have some action components with the quick time events and aiming a gun or other things like that. So it wasn't just like a walking simulator narrative driven where you're just choosing one path or the other, but you're choosing dialogue options. You're again doing quick time events and things like that. So for that type of game, I think it worked perfectly, and it was well executed. Like, it was easy to choose. It wasn't situations where like the buttons would get screwed up or you wouldn't really know what to do.
It was easy to choose.
Yeah, what about those standstill sequences?
Well,
Those
other
weren't
than-
executed so nicely.
Yeah,
Yeah, but
touche. I guess.
the decisions in most games have an impact on what you're doing. Any game
Wow.
with sort of strategy or anything.
Of course, but yeah,
Like,
but
the
that's-
story doesn't change.
I don't know. Like, a game like that could be very boring, and it just wasn't. Like, it did have, and I think that speaks to the gameplay and just creating these tense moments. And sometimes the timer went down quicker than others, depending on what was actually happening in that scene. And I thought that was excellent gameplay design there.
I think the thing that most contributed to the game being fun was the illusion of the choice. The belief that the choices were really having big impacts, but they weren't. And that's kind of stinky to say that was the most important factor.
I just don't agree with the game that can end up with any number of characters living or dying.
The game is exactly the same, essentially, except for maybe if someone died, you don't get to play a little bit of their part at the end or near the end. But the story doesn't even really change. All that changes is the credit interviews is essentially what changes. That's it.
I think the character surviving or not is a pretty big story change.
How?
You would think that, but in reality, it's not.
It's not, yeah, because nothing comes after it.
Well, anyway, I would say this with Soma. I mean, and this just might not be my thing, but it was just a little boring gameplay wise. Like, you went heavy in on the story, and we talked a lot about it in the episode with the story and what it gets you thinking and all of that. The concepts they're bringing out, but the gameplay itself was a little
Yeah, it was stale.
boring. It was
No,
literally just hiding. There is no fighting, which isn't necessarily bad in and of itself, but it was like I even felt that like a lot of the hiding was just like duck into this room and crouch, and it doesn't even really look like you're behind anything, but the wow or the other monster really couldn't see you, and then okay, run past them. And then, but also, it's too dark to see sometimes, and you just gotta hope he's not looking at you. And I don't know, it was just that over and over and over and over again with
Not to
really not.
mention the
no.
walking through the
Water.
stations,
Oh,
like
yeah,
to the
that's
different
Yeah,
stations.
to
right.
me that was the only bad part. Like those water parts that were
There
too
was a lot of
vast.
that.
There was a good amount of that. They could have did without that. But the gameplay isn't just hiding. The core component of the gameplay is discovery and the suspense of discovery. Now you're not there's not these like dopey collectibles that are meaningless that, you know, that's not how we're defining discovery here, but discovery of what's going on and how you ended up here and how the past events led to this. Like, that's the gameplay. That's what's enjoyable. And it creates a whole lot of suspense. And you feel that suspense as you're playing it. So it really makes you feel.
All right, so the Evil Within 2, I mean, definitely has, the traditional sense of the word gameplay. It definitely takes the cake. So I mean, you're doing a lot in the game. You're controlling the character, like, first of all, like, and you have free range to move him however you'd like. And then, you have multiple options for taking down enemies. There are multiple kinds of guns and weapons to use. You can use stealth. There's the whole progression system that I mentioned earlier where you can upgrade different skills. Um, so you have like, your RPG elements in there. It's just like, and then there's like I said earlier again, there's like side quests and like side missions to do. It's just definitely the most robust game gameplay wise. Like that's tough to refute.
I wouldn't refute that.
All right, moving on. And these games are all relatively came out in the same generation. We could talk about the graphics, I think, a little bit, and the sound. Kind of lump those in. I won't even go to the remake of Until Dawn because then that's very unfair.
I don't know. I don't. You guys are obviously are free to argue for your games. I really don't feel like the sound or graphics in any of these games stood out much or impacted the experience much at all.
I would disagree because in Until Dawn, I mean, we even mentioned in the episode like the crunching of the snow and like hearing the Wendigos off in the distance and just getting different perspectives, like the Wendigo's vision when you're like about to get into a cabin or something, and it just was created really a lot of that scary atmosphere. Um,
I don't
you
know
know,
if you could hear the snow crunching created a scary atmosphere, but go
No,
ahead.
no, but like that created a level of realism that really made you feel in the game, and then that in turn kind of amps up the scare factor because you feel it's representative of like a real life situation, and just the death animations were that they were gory, and I think it underscores the level of danger they were all in. And I think I'm kind of I should have said my best point first, but I mean, these are real actors playing these parts, so the voice acting is on point. They use their the imaging to get their the characters to look like the actors that played them. So that was obviously very advanced and again created that level of realism. So I mean, I think it's kind of hard to argue. I mean, Soma, obviously was a little bit. It seemed like a lower budget type of game. It definitely had, I think, the poorest graphics out of these three. Um,
But
which
but
that green.
it worked. Sorry to cut you off, and I guess this isn't necessarily part of graphics. I don't know if I should have put this in gameplay, but the first person perspective adds to the, feeling like you're really immersed in the game. So I thought that was a good choice that the other games could have done to really make you feel more immersed.
It's just that Simon was such a boring character. They figured we don't want to showcase him. Let's let people think that they are Simon.
Well, we all are Simon because he's an everyman,
We are Simon.
and Simon is we.
Yeah, I mean, they probably needed to make Simon or make it first person so that it didn't give away that you were playing a robot right from the
Yeah,
beginning of the game.
that's true.
Well, whatever the reason, it really added to the immersion.
I don't know about that.
But when you like when one of the few monsters or was actually on screen or in the area, and then your heart rate would go up, and like the sounds that it would make like that, it made my heart rate as the player go up also. You know, so that those are really great additions to a low budget game that really added to the fear factor. And also, you were talking about snow crunching adding to the realism, but when you would hold down the run button, your heart rate would go up when you were running, and then when you stopped running, your heart rate would start to slowly or gradually slow down. Incredibly real.
Any comments on Evil Within 2, or are you going to concede this point?
I will not concede. So, on the topic of sounds, Evil Within 2 had some really creepy kind of stuff. I mean, just the sounds made by the various monsters throughout the game. You know, there's like the standard ones who are like, you know, grunting and growling and whatnot. Then you have the other ones who are like making weird kind of sounds, like the one that had like the gas coming out of its body. And
That?
did you want to? Yeah, that one. And then yeah, there's the you know, the one that had like the chainsaw arm, like laughing maniacally, running through the streets, and you know, you have this kind of like
Lullaby one.
yeah, there's that one, and then like you know, as you're just like trying to get through, you know, the open world through Union, you're like you know start hearing this laughing and the chainsaw grinding against the asphalt, you know, like in the distance, and you know it you know causes the suspense to go up and like the player to think like, oh, you know, am I in imminent danger right now? So things like that definitely added up to the fear factor, and then also you know like one of my personal favorite parts of the game, the drinking of the coffee, the nice like gulping sound.
And the winner.
It is cool how coffee gives you like full health restore in that game.
I don't think Soma had any gulping sounds.
That's just another you know key to the realism for Evil Within with the coffee.
All right, so we all made points how the choices and graphical and sound choices added to realism and fear factor for our respective games. So, anything
right.
else? Yeah,
I don't know. Do you want to do the finale? All right.
I'm ready.
We're going to give our final sort of ranking here for our unbiased opinions again. You know, we'll touch on them at the end of this episode, but really go back to each of the individual episodes on Soma Until Dawn and The Evil Within 2 to get you know our reviews as well as our unvarnished opinions. Again, and before we go, check us out on Instagram at X at Bros Boss Battles. That's BROS Boss Battles. Our website brothersandbossbattles.com. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get this podcast so you get all our content as soon as it comes out and becomes available. All right, and also comment here on your ranking of these three games. We'd love to hear them. We'll discuss them next time on the show to see, you know, what the listeners think of these three games as far as the horror category is concerned. All right, so I would have to say, for me personally, I'll start off. I mean, Soma's definitely in third for me of this. You know, I just thought the gameplay was the most boring. You know, the story was good. Maybe the best out of all of these, but I just overall Soma was too. I was really struggling with the other two where I was going to place them, and I just, you know, it really would go back and forth, but I go to like the desire to want to play it and look up information on it, and you know, I'm gonna have to give the slight nod to Until Dawn. As much as I like probably survival horror games, as far as a horror genre is concerned, most of anything. I don't know. Until Dawn, it really got its claws in me. It got its Wendigo claws in me, and I just couldn't. I don't know. I just thought about it a lot and really wanted to replay it after I played it. So you know that's my ranking. Until Dawn, slightly below that, The Evil Within 2, and then fairly below that, Soma.
I'll go next. So, like you, I am going to put Soma last. Yeah, that game didn't quite hit the spot for me. I didn't have a great time playing it. There are some good things about it, but yeah, it just didn't do enough for me to compete with these other two games that I actually really liked. And I also kind of struggled with where I was going to rank them, but I'm going to give the slight nod to Evil Within 2. Yeah, I mean, it's just like I had such a great time playing the game, and that was a game where I really wanted to replay it after I beat it and go for the platinum. I didn't actually end up completing it multiple times, but that was just in the interest of time, not in the interest or lack of interest in the game. And then, yeah, I mean, Until Dawn was great also. It's, in any other category, it probably would have made the number one rank.
All right, Pete, what do you say?
So almost everything I said about Soma in this episode, I actually do agree with. I kind of like the characters. I really like the story and how it makes you think and all that. But the thing I really can't get on board with is the gameplay. And it's really poor compared to the other two games. And since, we're talking about video games, I have to rank Soma third of the three. It's still a worthwhile game if you're into that kind of concepts and ideas like that. But for gameplay itself, it's really not worthwhile. And so it looks like I'm going to be the ultimate decision maker, tiebreaker here between these other two games. And it's funny because Until Dawn really seems like the type of game, or is the type of game that I would like. It's a unique game. It's not too heavy on, gameplay and all that stuff. Whereas, but enough gameplay. And Evil Within 2 is the type of game that I'm not really that so much into, with this long story and progressing your skills and using guns and killing a whole bunch of people and all that stuff. But I have to say, I had more fun playing Evil Within 2. So I have to give that the nod and make that Evil Within 2 the winner of this Brodown.
All right, there you have it. The Evil Within 2 comes out on top of the Horror Brodown 2025. Thank you for listening, everyone. Again, catch us on Instagram, X, YouTube, and Twitch at Bros Boss Battles. That's BROS Boss Battles. Our website, brothersandbossbattles.com. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get this podcast. And have a happy Halloween coming up in a couple of weeks. Take care, everyone, and until next time.